Okay, so that's a lot of points of agreement. So I also believe that there are genuine differences between the proper way of behaving morally and the improper way of behaving morally. And I think that they are grounded in human universals, even though there's a wide amount of variation. So that's a lot of points of agreement, right? So we know that there's two things we want to avoid, conceptually speaking, which is the moral relativism and this kind of moral absolutism that's grounded in an arbitrary statement of facts that you identify with religious fundamentalism. I would identify that with fundamentalism more generally, not with religious fundamentalism per se, because I see it also happening in secular states, let's say, like Nazi Germany or so it doesn't seem to be religious fundamentalism per se that's crucial to your argument.
No, it's not. So that just to close the loop on that, the only reason why I would focus on religion in particular there is that religion is the only language game wherein fundamentalism and dogmatism is not a pejorative concept. Dogma is a good word, specifically within Catholicism. And the notion that you must believe things on faith, that is in the absence of compelling evidence that would otherwise cause a rational person to believe it, that in a religious context is considered a feature, not a bug. Elsewhere, we recognize it to be a bug, and that's why the unique focus on religion. All right, so is it reasonable to assume that we've already established, at least in principle, that there's an association between the totalitarian regimes, let's say, and dogmatism, yeah.
And the dogmatism that characterizes religious belief.
Yeah.
What do you think, although at least in principle, the secularist totalitarian states and the religious fundamentalist totalitarian states do differ in one important regard, which is that the religious types ground their axioms in God and the secular totalitarian types don't. And so there's got to be something about totalitarianism per se that's independent of, that's associated with religious belief in the manner that you just described, but that's not particularly associated with the belief in God. There's something that makes them, that's a commonality between them. And so do you have any sense of what that might be?
Well, I think one has to acknowledge that there's something uniquely pernicious, at least potentially, about religious beliefs, because they have the otherworldly variable, the supernatural variable, you're going to get everything you want after you die, so this life doesn't matter issue. That allows for a kind of misbehavior that is especially
so it seems that the claim would be that if you put forward axiomatically your claim that God exists, then you can use that claim to justify whatever arbitrary atrocities your system might throw off.
Yeah, I guess the only point I was making there is that not all dogmas are created equal. Some dogmas are on their face more dangerous and more divisive.
But what I'm curious about specifically is, because it seems to me that the dogmas of the USSR and the dogmas of Nazi Germany were as pernicious as any religious dogmas, and they may also share important features with pernicious religious dogmas, but it isn't clear to me from your perspective what those commonalities would be.
Well, so, I mean, in some ways you're recapitulating an argument I've made, and this is an argument that I would make against you were you to claim, as you have elsewhere, that atheism is responsible for the greatest atrocities of the 20th century. The idea that Stalinism and Nazism and fascism were expressions of atheism simply doesn't make any sense. I mean, in the case of fascism and Nazism, it doesn't make any sense because the fascists and the Nazis, by and large, were not even atheists. I mean, Hitler wasn't an atheist, and he was talking about executing a divine plan, and he got lots of support from the churches, and the Vatican did nothing to stop him, and fascism, as you know, coexisted quite happily with Catholicism in Croatia and Portugal and Spain and Italy. So, but even in the case of Stalin, what was so wrong with that situation were all of the ways in which it so resembled a religion. You had a personality cult, you had dogmatism that held sway to a point where apostasy and blasphemy were killing offenses. You know, the people who didn't toe the line were eradicated, and so to take a more modern example, North Korea is a religious cult. It just doesn't happen to be a one that is focused on the next life or supernatural claims of,
so what would
magic.
Be so what would be the defining characteristics of a religious totalitarian movement that would make it different from a non-religious totalitarian movement?
Well,
because there's aspects that are similar.
They're very similar. I mean, the problem is dogmatism. The overarching problem is believing things strongly on bad evidence. And and the reason why dogmatism is so dangerous is that it doesn't allow us to revise our bad ideas in real time through conversation. Dogmas have to be enforced by force or the threat of force, because the moment someone has a better idea, you have to shut it down in order to preserve your dogmas.
Okay. So the commonality seems to be something like claims of absolute truth at some level that you're no longer allowed to discuss.
Yeah.
So that's another point of agreement then, I would say, because part of the reason that I've been, let's say, a free speech advocate, although I don't think that's the right way of thinking about it, is because I think of free discourse, like the discourse that we're engaged in, as the mechanism that corrects totalitarian excess or dogmatic excess. And so I also think that systems of governance that are laying themselves out properly have to elevate the process by which dogmatic errors are corrected over the dogmas themselves, which is why I think the Americans are right, say, with regard to their First Amendment, is the process of free speech is the process by which dogmatic errors are rectified, and so it has to be put at the pinnacle of the hierarchy of values, something like that.
No, I think you and I totally agree about the primacy of free speech.
Okay, good. Okay, so that's another. Fine.